The Direct interviewed Bo DeMaio, one of the writers of the upcoming X-Men '97 show. This is a relaunch of the '90s show, picking up where the original one left off. A few years ago, news of the show's return would have been met with cheers, but now, after years of writers, producers, and showrunners antagonizing fans for just being fans, any news of a reboot or relaunch gets a lot of skepticism. However, DeMaio made a comment that I haven't seen many other people working in the film industry make. Respect the work. Respect the source material. Actually want the job. Shocking, I know, but this is what he said when he was asked about hiring for the show. Quote, "My LP was the first hire, and he brought along all the amazing talent that followed. My general rule was you had to be a fan. No questions. I've been on shows, namely Witcher, where some of the writers were not, or actively disliked the books and games, even actively mocking the source material. It's a recipe for disaster and bad morale. Fandom as a litmus test checks egos and makes all the long nights worth it. You have to respect the work before you're allowed to add to its legacy." That he even has to say this tells you just how bad the problem has become. I can't think of many businesses that would keep people, let alone hire them, who actively hated the job. Retail comes to mind, but even then, if you go out of your way to be a douche to customers, you get fired. How many places would hire people who mock the job? His comment about The Witcher explains a lot of what was seen in that show. It was obvious to fans of the books and the games that the people managing the show seemed to hold the fans and the concept itself in contempt. It bled so much into everything that they did that someone like me, who's never read the books or played the games, could notice it. It was that obvious. And if I could see it, then you know the powers that be at Netflix could see it, and they would have to know it would affect the show's audience draw and popularity. What sense does it make to hire people who hate the thing they're working on? This reminds me of a scene from The Devil Loves Prada. Anne Hathaway's character gets hired as an assistant to Meryl Streep's character, who's a fashion mogul. There's a scene where Streep and her groupies look over some clothes, and this woman holds up two belts and says they look so different even though they're the same color, and Hathaway scoffs. Then Streep reams her by breaking down how Hathaway's cerulean sweater went from high fashion down to whatever bin Hathaway bought it from. Streep comes off as pretentious, but she still makes a good point. It may just be a job to you, but this stuff, as Hathaway called it, is more important than you think. If you don't love fashion and don't respect designers, then this industry isn't for you. The same goes for these films, shows, games, and comics. There are thriving industries, well, at least for some of them, behind these franchises. And every time you scoff at some concept or go out of your way to own the so-called toxic fans, you ruin that business, not just for yourself, but for all those who follow. The BBC brought back David Tennant for Doctor Who, probably to win back fans, but the damage has already been done. Disney tried this with Luke Skywalker, Boba Fett, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, but the damage has been done. I bet Amazon is going to try this with the Rings of Power, but the damage has been done. They've already shown that they hate the source material, hate fans of that material, and see these stories as nothing more than toys they can play with, break, and then leave for someone else to pick up. There need to be more people like DeMaio, people willing to say flat out that if you want this job, you have to be a fan. You have to love this stuff, because if you don't, everyone's going to know. It's going to show in your work. You shouldn't have situations with showrunners and writers saying things like they've never read comics because they don't know how to read the frames. That was from one of the heads for WandaVision. When she was asked about Mephisto's image being all over the show, she had no idea what people were talking about. She didn't know the character, the backstory, or apparently that it was even in the show. Compare this to the way that reboots were handled 20 years ago. We saw reboots of Johnny Quest, G.I. Joe, Transformers, He-Man, the Turtles. Most of the shows were great. They weren't trying to take the piss out of anybody or trying to piss anyone off. They just wanted to do less silly versions of the shows. There's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with appealing to an existing fan base or trying to grow the audience. You can do both of those at the same time. You don't have to pick just one. In the end, this is about entertainment. It's about having fun. It doesn't sound like a lot of fun to work on something you hate. Sounds even worse to work on something just to piss off people who actually like that thing. As we've seen, that usually doesn't work out that well. If you're lucky, you might end up making some money up front, but then you gotta deal with all the fallout afterwards. It doesn't pay to go after the people who are most likely to watch your shows. Amazon is learning this lesson the hard way. Chris Gore recently suggested that Amazon might rein in Payne and McKay, the showrunners, let them be the public face for a while, but bring in other people to clean this up, if for no other reason than to get people excited about the second season. I would be surprised if they didn't do that. But imagine what it would have been like if they just sought out those writers or creators in the first place. What better show could they have had by choosing people who like and actually read Tolkien? And that comes back to this X-Men '97 show. I hope the show is good. I watched the original when it aired. I would love for it to be a solid show. That said, think about what Marvel is basically admitting with this show. The current X-Men stories are so bad they'd rather continue a 30-year-old show than base anything on the plant clones currently calling themselves the X-Men. Just for those who don't know, a couple of years ago, Jonathan Hickman rebooted the X-Men books with a new concept of the X-Men living on the mutant island of Krakoa. At the center of this was Moira McTaggart, who turned out to actually be a mutant with the ability of reincarnation. She initially tried to cure mutations, but once Mystique and Destiny caught her and had Pyro burn her to death, Moira changed her tactics to try to ensure mutant survival. But every timeline ended in the death of mutants, and the eventual rise of a technoarchy, basically a souped-up version of the Phalanx. She finally stumbled onto a solution, resulting in the current timeline, and hid herself away. All mutants can now live on the island of Krakoa, where Xavier constantly scans their minds using Cerebro to create backups for them just in case they die. Should they die, the island will resurrect them, and then the mutants will have a totally not cultish in any way back-to-life party. Unfortunately for Hickman, Marvel wanted to drag out the story, and then identity politics got involved, resulting in the current X-Men comic book line. It's a perfect example of what happens when you hire people who hate and mock the source material and just see the books as a way for them to peddle their slash fiction. To say the books are bad is an understatement. This is almost Spider-Man Clone Saga bad. The X-Men books have tanked in sales, and Marvel continues to stretch out this Krakoa storyline that should have ended 2.5 years ago. They can't turn that into a show. The public will hate them. So instead, we're getting a relaunch of a beloved 90s show. Of course, we've been burned by nostalgia bait before, so it's always possible this show might suck. Let's hope it doesn't. Like many people, I grew up with the original, and it's been a while since we've had a good X-Men story. I really want to like the X-Men again, but I've been gotten before, so my guard is up. That said, it'd be nice to see something with the X-Men that doesn't feel like it was pulled from someone's Twitter feed. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.